Pilot, narrated by the author, James R. Nelson. Chapter 1. "What do you mean he tried to kill himself?" April Stoughton shouted into the phone. "Well, I really don't think he was serious," her mother said, trying to calm her. "At least I hope not. I came home from shopping and I found him passed out on the living room floor. He knew I was only going to be out of the house for about an hour. There were pill bottles all around him." April gasped. "That sounds serious enough to me. What did you do?" "Well, I dialed 911. The EMTs got here in a few minutes. They took him to the hospital and pumped his stomach. I thought he was doing better," April said. "That's what Dr. Craig indicated. I thought so too. Anyway, I have an idea I want to run by you," Margaret said. Okay, what?" "I think Eddie needs a change of pace, a new environment, something new to focus on." April had a feeling of what was coming next. "And?" I thought it would do him good if he could come and stay with you for a while." April paused. She thought about how much she wanted to share. "You know, Dennis only got home 2 months ago." I know. But Eddie and Dennis always hit it off. I thought it might be good for your brother to spend some time with him." April thought carefully. "Mom, you know there's a transition time when they come back from Afghanistan. I'm not sure we're ready for company." There was a pause. "Is there a problem? Does he have that PFD?" It's PTSD, Mother, and I don't know. He won't talk about it, but I know he's been through a lot. That I do know. I'm not sure company would be the best thing for us right now." "Think about Bobby. He loves his Uncle Eddie. I think it would do Eddie a lot of good to spend some time with Bobby. And if Dennis is having some issues, maybe he could talk to him about them. They get along so well." April bit her lip. I've got to think about it. How long were you thinking?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe a couple weeks. Just a few weeks. Enough time for him to quit dwelling on living at home with his mother. I know that's bothering him." She paused. "And September can be so nice in Chicago. I'd hate to think of him being cooped up in this house all fall. We both know what winter's going to be like." "But I thought he was getting better," April asked. "He is, but it's a slow process. He actually got a job for a while a few months ago." "He did?" April said, sounding surprised. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Well, I was going to see how long it lasted before I mentioned it. He was only there a few days. The pressure got to him, and he had to give it up." "What was he doing?" "He was helping the produce manager over at Pete's Groceries." "What pressure was there with that job?" April asked. "Oh, you know, dealing with the public. Eddie's been home so much. That's why I think it would be a good idea for him to come and visit you for a few weeks." April paused. "Okay, Mom. Let me ask Dennis. If Dennis is okay with it, I'll let you know." "Okay, dear. Say hello to that handsome grandson of mine." "I will. Bye, Mother." 381 miles due north, Wilfred Frederick stood on the third-story widow's walk of his old Victorian house and gazed out over Lake Superior. He was still in shock. It had only been a few weeks since a freak Great Lakes storm had sunk his fishing boat, the Pierre Marquette. The whole crew was lost, 5 local men. Their ages ranged from 23 to 47. Only 3 bodies had been recovered. While storms weren't rare on the Great Lakes, most occurred between November and March. This storm developed from nowhere. There was no warning. Wilfred had worked the shortwave radio from his office and listened as 30-foot waves pummeled the boat to pieces. He turned around and walked down the steps that led to his bedroom. His old German shepherd, Fitz, was waiting for him at the bottom. A narrow wrought iron circular stairway went up to the widow's walk. Fritz had no problem navigating the closed staircase that led from the first floor to the second, but he never worked up the courage to navigate the open circular staircase that led up to the roof. Wilfred sat down at his desk and picked up a small calendar with September 8th circled in red. That was the day of the accident. Next to where the calendar had been, Wilfred noticed a chipped blue plate covered with a large piece of homemade apple pie. He smiled as he pictured Ruth stealthily placing it there while he was up gazing out at Lake Superior. Ruth had been his housekeeper for 14 years, ever since he had hired her husband, Robert Halstead, to be his full-time handyman. The house had been built by his grandfather, Clarence Fredericks, in 1891. It was a large Victorian dwelling with a kitchen, dining room, parlor, 2 bathrooms, and a library downstairs. Upstairs were 8 bedrooms. 4 large ones were located at each corner of the house, with the 4 smaller ones nestled in between. 2 more bathrooms were upstairs, and there was a sunroom in the back of the house that was used during 3 of the 4 seasons. The house sat on top of an 80-foot cliff at the end of Peninsula Point Road, on a spit of land that jutted out into Lake Superior. A large black wrought iron fence with pointed stakes surrounded the house and unmistakably sent out a message which boldly stated, "Keep out, this is private property." The house was a landmark for local fishermen, since it stood out in such stark contrast to the surrounding swath of dark green pine forests. On a clear day, men a mile from the shore could spot it. It was the perfect place for his grandfather to start his fishing business. The house was built on 20 acres of land 16 miles northwest of Marquette, Michigan. A quarter mile from the house, at the bottom of the cliff, was a small fish processing plant and a 50-foot dock. Both had been abandoned for many years. His grandfather had moved from the rich waters of Nova Scotia, hoping to start his own fishing business. Wilfred liked to tell people that his grandfather had been run out of the area by a group of the town's jealous husbands, but that bit of colorful rumor had never been substantiated. Wilfred's father, Alfred, took over the operation in 1917 and ran it until 1967, when he passed away at the age of 77. During the 4 years of Wilfred's tenure, he bought a second boat and worked 2 crews for the next 35 years. When Wilfred was 23, he met Frances Stevens. She was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. They were married 2 years later. She was the daughter of the ore dock master in Marquette. She and her family had moved up to Upper Michigan from Detroit when she was 11. In March of 1976, they lost the twins, a boy and a girl. Both of them fell through the ice and drowned by the fish house dock. Frances never got over it. In the harsh winters and bitter isolation, living far out on the peninsula didn't help matters. Her mental health slowly deteriorated, and Wilfred's heart was broken 4 years later when Frances was committed to a mental hospital downstate. They had spent so many wonderful evenings standing on the Widow's Walk, hand in hand, gazing over the wild and beautiful Lake Superior. 13 years ago, the fishing declined on all of the Great Lakes, so the processing plant was closed and Wilfred sold the second boat. Then, 2 weeks ago, everything changed. His fishing business was finished, and so was his income. He knew he was too old to start over, and he knew fishing in the Great Lakes was a cyclical thing. Some years were good, and some were bad. The last 3 years had been bad. Because of it, he was 2 years behind on his county property taxes. He knew he had to have a meeting with the bank to see if they would give him a loan. Since he now had no income, it would have to be secured by his property value. He knew he didn't have much more time to pay off his delinquent bill. Wilfred put down the calendar, glanced at the clock, and descended the stairs toward the dining room. As he entered, he saw that Robert was already sitting at the table. Wilfred could smell a beef roast cooking in the oven. Ruth walked in with a large bowl of boiled potatoes and cooked carrots. She headed back to the kitchen and returned with the meat steaming on a platter. As Wilfred sat down, he could feel tension in the room. "I found where the cold air was coming in from the library," Robert said. "Had to caulk around the windows on the north side." "Good," Wilfred said. What about the other windows? How'd they look? I checked them all. Only ones that seemed a problem were the ones to the north. They get quite a beating from the wind and the rain off the lake. Ruth picked up the bowl of potatoes and handed it to Wilfred. He took one and passed it over to Robert. You know, I'm trying to set up that meeting down at the bank. Robert didn't look up from his plate. I know. Wilfred took a sip of coffee. If they don't come up with something, I think I can only hang on to this place for a couple more months. That's what Norm Floth told me down at the tax office. He said he's delayed it about as long as he can. He glanced quickly over at Ruth. She didn't say anything. Let's hope it goes good, Robert said. Wilfred ate quickly and pushed himself away from the table. I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to head up to my room. Thanks for taking care of those windows. You're welcome. Get some rest. You look tired. I'll see you in the morning. After Wilfred left, Robert helped his wife clear off the table. Once the dishes were washed, they retreated to their room on the second floor. They had divided one of the large bedrooms in the front of the house into a tiny bedroom and a small living area. The room had a hot plate, a small refrigerator, and a television set. Ruth was brewing a pot of tea. She drank it every night to help her sleep. Have you heard from your sister? She asked. No. Do you want to call her again tonight? Robert picked up a magazine. No. I told you I don't want to move back to Grand Rapids. I'm not going back downstate. 20 years was enough. My roots are here. I know. When I go down to Ann Arbor to see my sister, I can't wait to get back up here. Too bad good jobs are so hard to find around here. I'm just scared, I guess. I know, Ruth, 14 years is a long time. We've got it good here. We're not getting rich, but Wilfred treats us right. And we sure don't have a lot of stress like your sister does. What are we going to do if that loan doesn't come through? Robert rubbed the 2-day stubble on his chin. I think it will. Hell, the man's lived here his whole life. Ruth raised her eyebrows. I'm not so sure that's going to mean much. His business is gone. What's he going to use to pay back the loan? Robert flipped through a few pages of his magazine. I don't know. And you know what? I'm done wasting my time worrying about this again tonight. Ruth didn't respond. She knew he wasn't going to talk about it anymore. She knew how he felt. She had been born in Green Bay, Wisconsin, but had moved to the Upper Peninsula when her father was transferred to K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base when she was 3. Her father had been a career airman. It was sad when the base was shut down. It had taken a heavy toll on the area's economy. That was just one more reason jobs were hard to find. Like her husband, she was very comfortable with where her life was. It took a little getting used to at first, living so far from town. The isolated feeling of living on Peninsula Point without any neighbors. It took her even more time to get used to the house. Even from the beginning, when they first moved in, she thought the place smelled musty. Things got better when she started opening the windows every spring. Her husband thought the storm windows had probably been on for the last 10 years. It had taken a lot of work to get them off. Then there were the cobwebs. Living alone for so long, it was apparent that Wilfred had never given the place a good cleaning. And the dark wood. It seemed to absorb even the brightest sunlight. It had been tough that first year. She had never gotten used to the sounds. At first, Robert just laughed at her as if she were crazy. But she heard things. She felt things. Women were more sensitive than men. The cold drafts in the library, the sadness that would come over her when she walked into that back bedroom, things like that. Things she thought she would get used to, but never did. She glanced around at the clock, picked up the remote and turned the television on. She flipped through the channels until she found her show, America's Most Haunted Locations. Robert said, "Can you turn it down a little?" She turned the volume down and settled into a faded love seat. I should email them about this place. Robert looked up. What? I should let the show know about this place and how creepy it is. This place? What's so creepy about this place? Ruth got up and poured herself a cup of tea. What's wrong with you? You never listen. We've talked about this plenty of times. No, Ruth. You've talked about this plenty of times. Every time you bring it up, I tell you you're crazy. I know, but one of these days. Ruth, you keep talking about noises. This house is over 100 years old. It creaks and groans all the time, especially when we get one of those big winds off the lake. That's what old houses do. What about the cold spots when I walk into some of these rooms? Robert laughed. Like the library? Didn't you hear me tell Wilfred I fixed the caulking around some of the windows today? Guess what? I felt a cold spot too. But I bet they're gone tomorrow. Ruth ignored him. How could there not be spirits in this old place? I can just imagine what Wilfred's grandmother looked like hanging from the railing. That's your problem. You imagine. I told you I think I've seen her a few times. I know you did. If you don't believe in that stuff, you don't see anything. Like me. I've lived here as long as you, and I've never seen anything. You should have been with me the night a few weeks ago. I couldn't sleep. I went down to the kitchen for a glass of milk. When I walked back to the stairway, I could see her hanging down from the railing. Oh, come on, Ruth. What did she look like? It was a shadow. It was transparent, just like hanging there by a rope, slowly twisting around in an eerie breeze. I took one look and ran back to the parlor. I spent the rest of the night terrified down here. I finally fell asleep around 4 o'clock, and you didn't even know I was gone. Like I said, that's your problem. He shook his head. What's my problem? Your imagination. Your overactive imagination. All the old houses around here had people dying in them. That's how they did it back then. People didn't run to hospitals or emergency rooms when they got sick. They stayed home, and that's where they died. It's a little different when you kill yourself, and then the twins. How sad. I can just imagine how horrible. See, there you go again with your imagination. They fell through the ice. It happens every winter. We're surrounded by water. Every year someone falls through. That's another thing. When I go into the old nursery to dust, I always get a cold, clammy feeling. I've heard things in there. I have too, Robert said. There's bats in the walls up there. Is that what you hear? No, little voices talking. Sometimes I hear them singing. Some days I can't even clean in there. I just have to get out. Do you see them too? Robert asked with a big grin. Now you're just making fun of me, she said. What about when things move around? We put things down and find them in a completely different place. It happens a lot. Robert laughed again. And that would be Wilfred. Goodness, the man's in his 70s. I hate to admit it, but I think he's slipping a little. With all the things that's happened this year, I can see it's taken a toll on him. Laugh all you want. I bet that TV show pays good money when they use somebody's house. Since you don't seem to be doing much about our situation, maybe I should write to them and tell them about this place. And if they were interested, good luck explaining that to Wilfred, that a bunch of strangers from Hollywood were going to come over and take over his house. I want to be around when you tell him that. Ruth took another sip of her tea. All this talking, and now I've gone and missed half my show. Chapter 2. Uncle Eddie, Bobby screamed when he saw April's brother step off the train at Union Station. Eddie walked over, set down his suitcase, picked up Bobby, and held him high in the air. You've grown like a weed. How old are you now? I'm 10, Bobby shouted. 10 years old. That's a great age to be, Eddie said, giving him another push toward the sky. Eddie put him down and turned to April. Thanks for letting me stay with you. It's great getting out of Fond du Lac. He looked around. Where's Dennis? He saw April's smile disappear. He wanted to come. He really did, but he doesn't like crowds. He told us to hurry home because he can't wait to see you. Oh, okay. That didn't sound like the Dennis he knew, but he thought it would be best not to push the issue. During the ride back to the apartment, Eddie quietly asked, "How's Dennis doing? I've seen on TV that a lot of servicemen are having a rough time of it when they get back." April glanced at the back seat and saw that Bobby was engrossed in one of his many video games. I, it's too early to tell, I guess. But Dennis is different, that's for sure." "What do you mean, different?" "Remember how outgoing he used to be, the life of the party?" "Yeah." "Well, he's not like that anymore. He's very, I don't know, quiet, I guess. He doesn't talk much, and he likes to spend a lot of time alone." Eddie shook his head. "That is a change." He laughed. "Sounds more like me than Dennis." April smiled. "Speaking of you, how are you doing?" Eddie shifted in his seat. "Oh, I'm doing better, I guess. I had a rough patch there for a while." Tears welled up in April's eyes. "How could you? Do you know how much?" Eddie reached over and patted her on the shoulder. I know. It was a stupid thing to do." As they pulled up to the apartment, April said, "Dennis is anxious to see you. I'm hoping you can help him out.